ID 945-3184-6610 to hear and act on the following items. OR-2021-0016, ordinance text and map amendment to the New Haven zoning ordinance to require and incentivize the inclusion of affordable housing units in market rate development. Per order, Honorable Charles Decker, Chair. Attest, Honorable Michael Smart, City Clerk. These items are on file and available in the office of the City Clerk, room 202 at 200 Orange Street, New Haven, Connecticut 06510. Since this meeting will be held using solely electronic equipment, participation by a quorum of members at the same physical location is prohibited unless that location is made open to the public. Any member of the public may request in writing a physical location and any electronic equipment necessary to attend the meeting in real time no later than 24 hours prior to the meeting. Said person shall have the same opportunities to provide comment or otherwise participate in the meeting as would be afforded if the meeting were held in person, with the following exception. Under law, the committee is not required to adjourn or postpone the meeting if any person loses the ability to participate because of an interruption, failure, or degradation of any person's connection to the meeting by electronic equipment. For accommodations to view the meeting, please email publictestimony@newhavenct.gov or call 203-946-6483. For accessibility related accommodations, please call 203-946-7651 voice or 203-946-8582 TTY-TDD. Public comment / testimony may also be submitted via email to public testimony@newhavenct.gov before 2:00 p.m. on the day of the meeting. If you wish to present testimony at the meeting, you must register in advance at https://bit.ly/3G2YXCF or by calling 203-946-7934 or emailing publictestimony@newhavenct.gov before 2:00 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Public can view the meeting at https://bit.ly/3G2YXCF or listen by phone at 646-558-8656. Webinar ID 945-3184-6610. The password to listen by phone only is 09084156. Good evening, colleagues. I will call the roll for this committee. I will acknowledge alders who are with us who are not members of the committee, and then I'm going to briefly provide a roadmap for how, as chair, I intend this meeting to proceed. But I will start with the roll, starting with, let me just pull up my list here so I get the order right, but I know that we're starting with my vice chair, Alder Furlow.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Richard Furlow, representing the 27th Ward.
Welcome, Alder. Next, Alder Ferraro Santana.
Good evening, Rosa Ferraro Santana, Alder from Ward 13.
Welcome. Alder Douglas.
Good evening, all. Frank Douglas, Alder for Ward 2.
Welcome, sir. I do not see Alder Morrison yet. Alder Marchand.
Adam Marchand, Alder of the 25th Ward.
Welcome, sir. Alder Brackeen. I do not see yet. And I myself am the chair of this committee, Alder Charles Decker, Ward 9. I'd like to acknowledge and welcome Alder Abby Roth from the 7th Ward, Alder Eli Sabin, who's the Alder for the 1st Ward and the Alder-elect for the 7th Ward. We have Alder Ellen Kupo from the 8th Ward, and Alder Jill Marks from the 28th. Did I have that right?
Correct.
Beautiful. All right. Welcome, colleagues. I will remind colleagues that it is the custom of this committee, as well as other committees of the Board of Alders, that members of the committee should remain on camera, unless, of course, you need to step away for a moment to take a break, and that alders who are not on this committee should remain off camera, although you're welcome to be in here in the panel with us. Let me just double check the attendees list to make sure that I'm not missing any other colleagues. Great. So I'd like to just briefly, before we call on the makers of this item to present, I want to say how as chair I would like to proceed. I believe I've had this conversation with members of this committee and with the city, but it is my intention to keep the public hearing of this meeting open following the conclusion of tonight's meeting. It is my intention that we will continue with this item at a future meeting. It's a huge, complicated piece of potential legislation. It's completely core to the legislative agenda that we of the Board of Alders have set forward. I want to make sure that the public has ample time to testify, and I want to make sure that the public, as well as us on this committee, have time to digest everything that we hear tonight, both from the city and from this first round of public testimony. So members of the public who are with us, that means that this is not your only bite at the apple. There will be future opportunity to testify as well, which is going to be important because we have, I count, at least 30 members of the public who have signed up to testify this evening. As is our custom on this board, we're going to be limiting public testimony to 3 minutes. But the two caveats are, one, as I said, there will be another meeting where you have a chance to testify further, and anything that you submit in writing will be inserted into the public record, and there's not a length limit to that. So I will repeat all of that when it's time for the public testimony, once I start to call for public testimony. But given that sort of long preamble, I will call on the makers of this item to please join us. And a reminder to anybody who testifies, whether from the city or from the public, please begin your remarks by giving us your name and your address for the record. Director Woods and company, you can proceed when ready.
Great, thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure that all of our team was with us. If you see, yes, we have Attorney Pinto, Stephen Riley, Steve Fontana. I believe Arlevia Samuel will be joining a little bit later. She's at the Mayor's Night Out, but she will join when she is able to. So I think with that, we can start. I wanted, first of all, to thank you so much for taking up this item. You are right, it is a big and complicated piece of legislation, so I do appreciate your decision to keep the public hearing open over 2 months. I wanted to say this work has really been crafted by many departments, including City Plan, Economic Development, LCI, Corp Council, the Mayor's Office, as well as with the participation of many stakeholders and importantly, taking feedback and input from your colleagues on the board. So I'll start with a brief introduction of the team. My name is Aisha Woods, I'm sorry, and I reside at 42 Cantor Street. I'm the Director of City Plan. Steve Fontana from Economic Development is here. He will touch on the importance of our housing pipeline. Michael Pinto from Corp Council is here. He will go over an amendment that we will be presenting that clarifies certain projects that have pre-existing approvals. And Stephen Riley from HRNA Advisors is here. He was our consultant team that has been working with us since the beginning. So he can talk about the feasibility models and kind of the inner workings of the IZ policy. And then Arlevia, when she's able to join us, she'll be available for questions about implementation and also making sure the affordable housing reaches those who need it most. So this is this work is really an assignment that came out of the recommendations of the Affordable Housing Task Force in 2019. In January of 2020, Mayor Elicker prioritized the need to address the affordable housing crisis and asked us to advance this inclusionary zoning policy as one component of an affordable housing strategy. And again, as was mentioned earlier, the need to address the affordable housing crisis was, a centerpiece of the Board of Alders legislative agenda at the same time. So we began this work with an extensive market feasibility study with HRNA. This included interviews and workshops with housing advocates, affordable housing providers, as well as market rate developers. And really one of the things that came out of the report is, and this is also reflected in the findings of the Affordable Housing Task Force, is that the greatest need for housing in New Haven is really at the 50% AMI and below. So this policy was really designed to focus and prioritize that level of affordability. The market research culminated in a report right at the peak of COVID in April 2020. And because of the uncertainty about the market at that time, the policy recommendations were more modest than what you'll see before you tonight. We introduced that policy to the Board of Alder leadership at that time and heard concerns about the level of affordability, and so went back into the policy design. We workshopped it again with affordable housing providers, with developers, with stakeholders, and we were able to increase the levels of affordability, especially due to the strong market recovery over the past year. This policy, again, it was workshopped quite a bit. It was heard at the City Plan Commission in July at a public hearing, and it was voted on favorably out of the City Plan Commission. And it was also presented to the Affordable Housing Commission, actually prior to the City Plan Commission. So that's just some background on how we got to here today. And with that, I'll share my screen and go through some of the policy highlights and then turn it over to my colleagues. So is everybody able to see the screen?
We are, or at least I am.
Okay. And let's see if I can just figure out how to advance it. Okay. So what is inclusionary zoning? We'll just start with a really basic overview. Inclusionary zoning laws create affordable housing by encouraging and requiring developers to set aside a percentage of housing units at below market rates. These laws aim to provide housing to low-income residents who would otherwise unable to be able to afford it. IZ has been growing in popularity around the country. There's hundreds of cities who have adopted it, so we have a really good kind of benchmark analysis, to base our policy on, and what has worked, what doesn't work. Most importantly, it requires developers to include these affordable units without, the typical affordable housing subsidies. So without the funding that some of our affordable housing developers get from CHAFA or from other sources. And instead of those, that direct funding, the way the projects are feasible are through incentives such as a bonus density or tax abatement. So inclusionary zoning is just, it won't solve the affordable housing crisis in and of itself. It's just one tool that we can use in a whole range of tools. It's important very much it's important to look at it in the context of other equitable zoning changes, such as the ADU legislation that was before you recently. It's also important to consider it with anti-displacement measures and tenant protections, with landlord accountability. It's also important to consider it within the regional housing plan. New Haven has the highest percentage of affordable housing in the region, but we still have a need, and we can still be a model, for other communities in adopting this type of legislation, and as well as other affordable housing measures. Okay, so again, going back to the IZ policy goals, it increases the affordable housing supply by creating new affordable units as part of a new development or as part of a substantial conversion, which we're seeing some in the city today. And it fosters a mixed income development rather than 100% market rate. It importantly provides affordable housing in areas of opportunities with greater access to jobs and services, amenities, schools. It also captures a portion of the value of the rising land costs to help fund affordable housing. So the point of IZ is really to reduce racial and economic segregation by providing opportunities for people to live in high quality projects in high opportunity areas. It's also meant to overcome exclusionary zoning, a legacy of redlining that concentrates affordable housing in low income neighborhoods and excludes it from neighborhoods with a strong market and more opportunities. So it's important to keep that kind of underlying reason behind the IZ policy. And again, in and of itself, it doesn't, it's just one tool we can use. Okay, so just briefly, I'll go through the different components of the policy. So one of the components is a geography, and you'll see a map or a little bit later in the presentation. So the geography is really determined by the market study, and there's a number of different tiers based on the strength of market performance in those areas. The requirement is about the length of affordability, also about the applicability to projects of a certain size and whether or not there's an in lieu fee option. Incentives, again, include zoning measures. They can include tax incentives. And I'll go through the specifics. And then equally important, though not part of the legislation per se, is the administrative policy. So understanding how this will be implemented through the city, through the development approval process, and then managing the program and enforcement. Okay, so we'll just go a little into more detail in each of these areas. And these are what is in the policy and the legislation that you see before you. So the policy proposes that all new projects that have public land associated with them, so that would be subject to an LDA, would have a minimum of 20% affordable units, that 50% AMI and below. And that would apply to all buildings that are greater than 10 units. This is very similar to the policy in Newark. In addition to applying it to city-owned land, the market part of the policy is as follows. Tier 1 is the core downtown, so that's where it's basically centered around downtown, where we've been seeing, the greatest number of development projects over the past 5 years. And so the proposed percentage of set-aside units would be 15%. 10% of those would be just baseline required at 50% AMI. And then additional 5% would be prioritized for voucher holders. And this would be through an arrangement with the housing authority. And again, it's mandatory for all developments 10 units and above. In the secondary market, which is primarily around downtown, the requirement would be 5% for all 10 and above unit buildings. And then in the remainder of the city where we haven't seen as much market activity, there would be a 5% requirement for projects that are 75 units and above. So the intention was really to create permanent affordability. And so we're proposing a 99-year term on this. This is basically beyond the lifespan of most projects, but it just, creates so there's no sunsetting in this policy proposal. Again, for the core tier and the strong tier, it would apply to 10 plus units. And then citywide, it would apply to 75 units and above. There's also, developers could opt in if they're not required. So that's important as well. They might like the zoning incentives. We're also proposing an in lieu fee as an option. So if a developer, prefers to do the in lieu fee, this would go into an affordable housing fund that could help support affordable housing elsewhere in the city. So the in lieu fees are set fairly high, and that's because we really want to encourage the production of affordable housing in the core market, but it is there as an option.
Director Woods, I'm going to interrupt you briefly just to acknowledge. I see Alders Kimberly Edwards and Steve Winter have joined us, as well as Alder Jeanette Morrison, who is a member of this committee. So welcome, colleagues. Go ahead, Director Woods.
Okay, great. So, in order, the concept of the inclusionary zoning policy is that you look for ways to balance incentives with the requirements so that it doesn't make projects unfeasible and it doesn't discourage development. And there's a number of different incentives that are typically used in IZ policies. So one of them is the floor area ratio bonus. So that's simply allowing buildings to be a little bit bigger. In some places, it's framed as adding another floor, but here we're proposing a 25% FAR bonus. Parking minimums would be waived. In our conversations, particularly with affordable housing providers, parking requirements are some of the biggest barriers to the production of affordable housing. It costs a lot to make parking spaces. We're also offering a density bonus. So this is so that the number of units can be calculated at a 600 square foot. It doesn't mean that the units are all going to be smaller. It just means that currently New Haven has a very high minimum floor area per unit per project at 1,000. And so this would, and the extra space is given over to things like amenities and, potentially retail and other types of uses, but this really allows for a much more efficient project. And then there's also a tax abatement proposal here. So in the core, and this is for 10 years, right? So the tax abatement proposed is 30% in the core market. It's 5% elsewhere in the city. So it's 1-for-1 with the affordable units elsewhere in the city. In the core market, there's higher land costs, potentially for larger projects, a higher construction cost. And so there's a slightly higher or a higher tax abatement proposed for the core market. And finally, on the, again, on the administrative policy, this is something we have a final draft that we're working on, but it really talks about how when a project comes in, you know, to city plan for development approval, they would have to apply, you know, demonstrate their intention and their zoning compliance with IZ prior to building permit. They would have to have their marketing plan and their tenant pipeline in place. And we've laid out other benchmarks that we can, you know, if there's questions about, we can go into in more detail later. And then the, you know, the tenant, the enforcement and the tenant screening would be, you know, managed by LCI, potentially with a third party partner on that. Okay, so just very quickly, this shows kind of the breakdown of what a typical core market project would look like. So a 50-unit building, there would be 5 units at the 50% AMI or below, and 3 units for voucher holders. And so the range for a voucher holder goes from 30% AMI to, you know, it could be higher than that, but this gives you a sense of the income levels and the proportions. Again, you know, looking back, again, this is not, you know, this is not solving our affordable housing crisis, but this gives you a sense of, you know, some of the projects that have been built and occupied in recent years, what it would look like under an IZ policy. So for example, 200 College, there would be 24 units. At the Audubon, there would be 40 units. At the Novella, there would be 20 units that were affordable. And over, you know, 1,000 units built, it would produce between 120 and 160 units. Again, just a point of comparison with other policies. Most IZ policies are really geared towards, you know, what's called kind of workforce housing, that may be between the 60, 80 to 120% AMI. You'll see the majority of them are in that 50 to 80% AMI bracket. New Haven's policy is really unique in that it really targets, you know, that deeper level of affordability. Just briefly, so that you can see the map, the core area is really this downtown area that has seen a lot of development over the past few years. And then the strong market extends further out. It includes East Rock. It includes Long Wharf, anticipating, you know, some new developments down there. And then the rest of the city would be subject to the subject, you know, larger projects across the city would be subject to the IZ. Just for context, to give you a sense of the level of rents, because a lot of times this is, you know, what people can relate to. The 50% AMI rental levels are shown here. And so we're really looking at these top 2 areas. These are rent limits set by HUD. So the policy would be progressed, you know, according as those numbers change from HUD. Again, just a brief thank you again to all of the stakeholders who participated in discussions about this. And I think that is the end of our slideshow. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm happy to take questions, or we can leave questions till the end. I can turn it over to Steve for a few remarks on the pipeline in general.
Are each of the members of your team here planning on saying something?
Yeah, so Steve was just briefly going to talk about, our current market conditions. Attorney Pinto is here to really walk through some of the amendment changes relating to pre-existing approvals. And Stephen Riley here is here for any complicated and mathy questions about the IZ policy.
Okay, in that case, let's get through the presentations and then the committee can ask questions.
Okay, great. So
Thank you, Aisha. If it's my turn, for the record, Mr. Chair, I'm Steve Fontana, one of the city's 2 deputy directors of economic development, and I reside at 23 Angel Place in North Haven. And so it's a pleasure to be with you, Alder Decker, and your colleagues on the legislation committee, and offer a few remarks tonight. I think it's pretty clear that we all agree that New Haven needs more quality housing, including and especially affordable housing in all of the city's neighborhoods. The question that we faced over the last year or two, and I want to acknowledge both Aisha as well as Olivia Samuel and her predecessor, Serena Neal San Giorgio, for leading this effort and allowing me to be a part of it, was how we could address that issue given the city's limited tools and limited resources. So I think, as Aisha indicated, we freely acknowledge that the proposal we've come up with and we presented to you tonight is a relatively small tool that we can pass eventually to help to address housing affordability in New Haven and availability. And I'm sure many of you have heard this term before, but we shouldn't allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. The fact is, this proposal relies upon the private sector to continue to make the kind of significant investment they've been making in New Haven over the last several years, and to continue to do so, but to do so now by including affordability specifically within their developments. And I think the last thing that any of us wants is to see that investment decline, or for us to deter or discourage that development, because the last thing we want is to have housing development and affordable housing development specifically to diminish as a result of anything we might do. I think the significant element to this proposal before you tonight is that it was prepared by HR&A Advisors, which is a national entity, national consulting firm that prepared an objective and impartial analysis of our market and what our market can reasonably bear. So as a result, it's a coherent, cohesive program that we would ask you all to consider respectfully and to potentially approve as a way of beginning to address the issue that we all face. One of the tools or the mechanisms within it, which I think is important to mention, is that it provides specifically for revisiting it periodically and fine-tuning it. I think that over time, we may need to make adjustments, but I think the important thing is to try to consider passing and enacting and implementing a system which begins to incorporate, as Aisha said, the affordability elements throughout the city, and especially in the core and strong markets downtown and in the adjoining areas. So in terms of the pipeline, we are fortunate that we've had a lot of people looking to invest here, and we're looking ideally to have that continue, because this tool relies upon those private developers continuing to see New Haven as an attractive place to invest. And I'm confident, and I think we're all confident, that New Haven remains that kind of environment. But the issue is we don't compete in a vacuum. There are other opportunities that developers have. And the goal really here is to ensure that we continue to be an attractive place, because again, if we're relying upon them to incorporate affordable housing units within their developments, the last thing we want to see is to have them say that New Haven is not a place to develop and invest. So again, I think, as Aisha said, this will not solve our affordable housing problem, nor is it designed to solve our affordable housing problem. I think we all can agree that the federal government and state governments, through their subsidies of affordable housing, can do far more than we can do with our limited means to promote affordable housing development. But this can be, along with some of the other things that Aisha described, a tool that will help us to make progress on that. So as she indicated, we are, by virtue of the design of this program, one of the most progressive communities in the country when it comes to incorporating affordability into private market rate development. So I would just say in conclusion that this is a well thought out, coherent strategy. It needs to be obviously considered very carefully by all of you. And I look forward to hearing the debate and to answering any questions you may have. But I think that overall, while you may hear from many people who may tell you that it's not enough, there are others who will be prepared to say that it's very challenging for us to enact something like this. So I think we've tried to hit the sweet spot, and I think we've done that. And I look forward to your questions, and I thank you for allowing me to comment.
Good evening, Chairman Decker, members of the committee, Michael Pinto, Assistant Corporation Counsel. I reside at 449 Central Avenue in New Haven. I believe that since the original submission, we've been working on some amendments to clean up some of the text to make sure that it is as clean and consistent with the existing zoning ordinance as possible. In particular, there were one of the things you're going to see in the substituted text is some of the definitions that are specifically related to the IZ overlay have been moved into section 50, which is the section that lays out the IZ policy. Definitions that are generally applicable across the zoning code were left as amendments to section 1 of the code. But as I said, some of them have been moved where they're effectively only used for the IZ policy, and so there's a bit of restructuring. We will be going in because this will be kept open. I'm going to go through with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that all our cross references with that restructuring are correct. But the major edit and substantive edit is identifying the existing, identifying the existing approvals or submissions that will be exempted or not, will not have the IZ apply to them because they're at either all laws should be of future application unless there's very few instances where, and you have to specifically spell out where it's going to be retroactive. And particularly in the case of land use entitlements and land use applications, it's particularly difficult when you have existing approvals. And in our case, applications come in through a number of different city agencies. The Board of Alders, in the case of DLD, land disposition agreements and development and land disposition agreements, site plan approval, obviously, and it goes through City Plan Commission. Other, smaller applications may go through the Board of Zoning Appeals, and then some applications simply go through the Building Department. We have tried to, in the exemptions, we've identified, in effect, the existing agreements that are already in place or approved by one or more of the city agencies that will be eventually involved, whether it's a DLDA that's already in place or City Plan Commission site plan review approval that has already gone through. And that because some of these projects take a fair amount of time to develop and have been in the pipeline at one stage of approval or another, we've carved out some exemptions for those. And you will find those in the identified section 50C, C2 in particular. And so anyone who has a sort of, by way of example, there are a number of existing or pre-approved by the Board of Alders DLDAs. So anyone in that case, but they may not, those developments may not come to City Plan Commission prior to the enactment of this legislation or its effective date in somewhere in, say if it's, assuming it's somewhere in January, the site plan review may come afterwards. But so effectively we're grandfathering in someone who has that approval, and frankly, anyone who is in under the wire. If a new development came in and it applies under the existing regimen before the IZ ordinance is approved, they should be deemed to have come in and be reviewed under the applicability of the current zoning ordinance. That is what I have for now. I'm happy to, when we get to questions, I'm happy to go through it. The definitions have all been added to either the definition section and also the exemption section. And I'm happy to go through anything that we need to address during questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Pinto. Mr. Riley, do you have anything to add at this point?
No comments from me at this point. Just available to answer questions.
Thank you. Well, with that, I'm going to open the floor to members of this committee, to colleagues, to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand either using your Zoom tool, or you can also just raise your hand. I'll see you. And I recognize Alder Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Where do I start? Although this is a great idea, I feel like this particular process that you guys are trying to enact, if it's passed, then developers that come into our community might only want to do exactly what you have, right? What you're asking for. For example, in my ward, I have a project that's coming online. When they contacted me as the alder, they came and whatever they were talking about, they said that they wanted to do 20% affordable. That wasn't good enough for me. Out of the 124 units that they proposed to do. Ultimately, I asked for 50 units because if you really want to do affordable and you really want to make an impact in these various communities, make an impact. And so they figured out a way to be able to give me 50 units. I'm afraid with this, what's being proposed now, that if it's passed, that's going to take those type of conversations off the table. And at the same time, I don't want to get in the way of the city constantly developing, but at the same time, I don't want to get in my own way of advocating for my constituents to get more. When they proposed the 20% affordable, that was going to be like, I don't know, 10 units or something very small. And I look at a community such as mine, that people want to stay in their community. And there is no reason why, if new housing comes online, that they can't do that. But they can't do it when these rents are so high. And when only 2 or 3 or 10 people can get into an apartment building that might have 150 units. And so I just want to try to get an understanding in regards to what is your plan to support the need for more? Like, is this written up to say, okay, this is the expectation, 20% affordable, and basically there's no other conversation that needs to be had? Or is it written up in a way that you're saying the minimum is 20% affordable? However, you still need to have these conversations with your alders and whomever else. Because for me, 20% is of nothing is good enough. 30% really wasn't good enough, but I went with it. And so that's really my question. Like, are you tying our hands? Because I feel like this conversation is tying our hands, and I don't like my hands to be tied, because I'm always going to go for the gusto. I'm gonna shoot for, like they say, shoot for the moon. You might land on the stars. Or I'd rather land on, if I have to land somewhere, I want to land on the stars. So I don't know if Director Woods, you I don't know who can answer that question, but this makes me nervous, because if we had this, I don't think that company would have even had a conversation with me, and they would have just went with their 20% that they were proposing right from the beginning.
So I'm happy to provide some thoughts, and I really appreciate that example and your perspective. This in no way precludes projects with higher affordabilities. I think the project that you're referencing, they were able to get additional funding for those additional units. So this is really just setting a baseline requirement in the market portion of the project, but it doesn't in any way preclude somebody from going for CHAFA funding. And then we're also in the policy guidebook, we're strongly recommending a meeting with neighborhood constituents ahead of the development process, so that developers can understand what the needs are from specific to a neighborhood. So again, this is not at all a ceiling on affordability requirements. All of the projects that have those 20% or greater than 20% affordability are projects that have been able to secure additional funding, from CHAFA or from other affordable housing sources. So
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so as long as those projects are able to secure that additional funding, that's great. This only applies to projects that are not receiving that funding, and so they wouldn't be able to apply, for example, CDBG to those affordable units and use it, instead of adding units. Like if they came to the city and asked for some federal funding assistance, they would have to add more units to that baseline. So it's a floor. It's definitely not a ceiling, and it shouldn't it shouldn't discourage the demand and also the interest or viability from other affordable housing providers. One thing it will do, it will help, by creating an affordability requirement for the market rate sector, it reduces them competing in the affordable housing market in the same way. So it leaves a little bit more space for projects that are really geared towards affordable housing, and that are able to secure that additional funding.
Okay, so
Alder Morrison, before you continue, I just want to recognize Alder and Third Officer Salvatore DeCola, who has joined us this evening. I also want to remind colleagues that Obviously, we're all extremely passionate about this issue. It's core to our legislative agenda, as we've been saying, and it's our job as this committee to, ask whatever questions we need answered in order to come to the right decision. I do also want to point out that we have currently 51 members of the public in the waiting room. I'm not sure if everyone is here to testify. Some people might just be here to watch. So in deference to the public, if we could just do our best to keep our questions kind of pointed, that would be great. Alder Morrison, you may proceed, and then I'll have Alder Furlow next when you're through.
Okay, so I guess the issue that I'm having with this is that with this type of legislation that's being proposed, the automatic, in a sense, 20% that's there, that's not an incentive for the developer to go find more money. So when I pushed back on that developer, that's when that developer went back to figure out another way. He figured out, okay, I need to add some units and I need to go and get this money. Well, when they first came to the table, it was automatic. Oh, we're going to give you 20% affordable, da, 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 da. So, and then another things that you said, Director Woods, was that it's encouraged that you talk to leaders and constituents. It's not mandated. And so those are two totally different things. And so that's why I'm asking these kind of questions. Maybe the language needs to be changed to mandate that, that conversation happens with legislators in the community and, all those different people. I just don't want to be in this situation as a legislator with my hands tied, or a developer coming and saying to themselves, well, this is a done deal. I gave them their 3 units where they're 20% and we're all set. So that's where my mind is thinking with that. So I just wanted to put that out there. As the chair said, he has a lot of people in the waiting room, but that's where I am with this whole process. So thank you.
Thank you, Alder Morrison. Alder Furlow is next on the queue. Alder Furlow, you need to find that mute button.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In light of what you said, and I fully agree, I think it might be wise if we go right to the public, and perhaps alders might be able to save their questions for the next meeting after the public has testified. That might be wise. And it might be good also for colleagues to remember that this has come to us now, and that we will be the ones that will be making any kind of amendments and changes as this committee sees fit. And so it's just a recommendation, Mr. Chair, because there are 50 people here, and it might be good if we hold our questions till the next meeting.
Thank you, Alder Furlow. I appreciate that suggestion. Does anybody have questions that they feel are extremely urgent to ask right now? We can also request that our city staff stay till the end of this meeting, and we can have another go at them after. The public would be another way to do it. We'll have a few opportunities, but does anybody have questions that they think are quite urgent right now? I see Alder Douglas's hand. I recognize you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not a question, but I do agree with Alder Furlow, Mr. Majority Leader. I think we need to really inhale on what the public has to say about this whole process. So I agree with my colleague. Let's move forward and open it up to the public. And then we can, like you said, we can rebut at the end, after or the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Douglas. I will make one call for any members of this committee with urgent questions that they need answered right this moment. Seeing none, again, if possible, I will ask city staff to stay on the call, stay on the Zoom. I think I will probably have some questions after the public. But for now, I will ask, are there any members of the public who wish to be heard on this item? I suspect we may have a few. Our intrepid staff, I'm sure, is letting in our first member of the public. Before we begin with public testimony, in case anybody arrived at this meeting late, I just want to repeat what I said at the top of this meeting, which is that it is my intention as chair of the legislation committee that we will not be closing this item this evening. We will not be voting on this item this evening. We will be hearing testimony this evening. When we adjourn the meeting, the public hearing will stay open. And so the public hearing will be continued at a future date, which will be, duly posted and noticed. Also, given that we have so many people sign up to testify, the only way to be fair to everybody who's here to testify, the only way to be fair is to have a time limit on testimony. And so we're going to enforce a time limit of 3 minutes per testimony. I'm going to ask my vice chair if he's willing and able to keep the time. We're not going to be making exceptions on that. However, again, there will be a future public hearing, so you'll have a second crack at it. And furthermore, you can submit written testimony. You can email publictestimony@newhavenct.gov as always. Anything that you submit as written testimony will go into the public record. It will be available to members of this committee. It will be available to the public. I assure you, well, I can only guarantee for myself, but I will read it, and it is the practice of this committee to read all submitted testimony, including testimony that has been submitted prior to this meeting. I just want to make sure there's nothing else that I want to say about logistics before we get started. I think that just about covers it. So I see we have our first member of the public here. Oh, one last thing is I would ask, if at all possible, any member of the public here to testify when it is your turn, please turn on your camera so that we can see you. And so with that, I will call on Jamie Myers McPhail. You may start when you are ready, and Alder Furlow, I will ask you to keep the time, please, if you're willing and able. I see the thumbs up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alder Decker. I apologize. I don't have my camera on. I'm on a phone, and I would like to read my testimony if that's okay with you.
Proceed.
Okay, my name is Jamie Myers McPhail. I live at 135 Bellevue Road, and I organize with New Haven Rising. I'm also a member of the Affordable Housing Commission. In New Haven Rising, affordable housing is a top priority for our membership. In our organization's charter, one of our major goals is to promote affordable, livable, and secure housing. It's also a top priority of the Board of Alders and the legislative agenda, which came out of talking with thousands of constituents across the city. So with the goal in mind of creating more affordable housing, we've been advocating for a number of policies. In 2018 and 2019, we advocated for inclusionary housing at the Affordable Housing Task Force, and now our city has the opportunity to make this type of policy a reality. Since 2018, we've also advocated for a city-run housing trust fund, which could hold in lieu of fees and other funds to build affordable housing. In New Haven Rising, we are fighting to change the maps of segregated development. Every single low-income neighborhood in New Haven today was marked as declining or as hazardous by redlining maps in 1937. The map of home foreclosures after the Great Recession mirrors the map of COVID-19 infection rates today. We have a crisis of segregation in our city that is unjust and costs lives. Our city's affordable housing crisis is a main part of this broader crisis and is urgent that we address it now. Inclusive zoning is one tool that our city can implement to ensure more residents have access to affordable, safe, and secure housing. We need more affordable housing. 34% of New Haven's population spend more than half of their incomes on housing. We hear stories constantly while knocking on doors and from our members across the city of folks who are displaced and folks who are stuck in unsafe conditions with black mold, lead paint, and other disrepairs that cause lifelong health challenges. Those that have argued against inclusive zoning do not endure these conditions. If you have any doubt that this will have an effect on development in our city, just look at who is opposing it. Opponents of this project include developers of luxury housing, who do not put a single affordable housing unit in their projects willingly. Opponents include development lawyers who represent those developers and have shepherded a boom in luxury housing that provides few options for many who are currently living in New Haven. These are precisely those who New Haven should be encouraging to find ways to put affordable units in their projects, and their opposition should be read as an urgent reason we need to pass inclusive zoning. We have witnessed a transformation of our city with luxury developments like the Winchester Lofts, the Corsair, the Audubon, and hundreds of other units. I can't afford even a studio unit in these buildings. Much like waves of opportunity that New Haven recently experienced, this wave is cutting out those who have always been cut out of opportunity. Yale developed Science Park, and New Hallville still has the shortest life expectancy of any neighborhood in the city. The Winchester Lofts not only didn't provide enough opportunities for housing for those who have long lived in the neighborhood, but it is part of the gentrification and displacement spreading out from downtown into Dixwell, Dwight, Hill North, and beyond. Inclusive zoning won't solve this, but it is a tool that can help us resolve decades of segregated development, increase affordable housing, and hold developers accountable. We must ensure that those who profit from building in our city contribute tangible benefits to historically under-resourced communities, and that current working class residents aren't displaced in the process. But the city must pass an inclusive zoning policy that stops giving away our taxpayer money to line the pockets of wealthy out-of-town investors and stops replicating our city's unjust historical mistakes of redlining and gentrification. Thank you.
Thank you. So staff has helpfully numbered everybody in the waiting room, I believe, based on the order in which people signed up ahead of time. And then if you didn't sign up ahead of time, what order you joined the room. I do not know that everybody in the waiting room actually wishes to give testimony, but I'm just going to each time read out the next three names just so folks can sort of know when your turn is coming up. So I have coming up next is Jess Corbett, followed by Rebecca Corbett, followed by Abby and Helen.
I don't intend to testify tonight, sorry.
Fair enough. I believe then we have Rebecca Corbett next. Ms. Corbett, if you're there and when you're ready, please give your name and address for the record, and then you may proceed.
Hi, I was having a problem with my phone.
We got you now.
Can you see me? Great, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Rebecca Corbett. I live at 616 Winthrop Avenue in New Haven. I'm a member of the Affordable Housing Commission. I'm here to testify about affordable housing crisis and the urgent need for the city to address it and why I'm in favor of inclusionary zoning. When I think about affordable housing, I think about my own past. We're talking about 30 years ago. This isn't a problem that just popped up overnight. When I was raising my two sons, I was on welfare and I had to make hard decisions just how to make ends meet and keep a roof over my kid's head. I stayed with a partner too long, somebody who I wanted me and my kids to get away from simply because I couldn't afford rent on my own. Finally, we split up and I was so scared because I had nowhere to go, no family who could take me in or help me get by, no resources. Do you know what it's like to look in your kids' faces and not know how you're going to take care of them? It's pretty scary. I reached out to the state, but they wanted to send me to a shelter all the way out in Derby. My sons were 10 and 14 years old at the time. They were having a really hard time in school. I knew that if we moved districts, one of my sons would have failed out of school. Finally, the state agreed to put us up in a hotel and we lived there for over a year. To this day, I can't stand hotels. If I've got to go someplace where I stay overnight, I try to find an Airbnb. So when my life started to turn around and I got a good union job at Yale, what my job meant to me at that time was freedom to choose my own place to live, freedom from unsafe partners. When we say good jobs and affordable housing, that's what we're talking about. Freedom to leave abusive and unsafe situations and to take care of our children so their lives can be better than ours. But even now, even that I'm one of the lucky people who've made it when I've been able to buy my own home, retire, have a pension, take vacations when I want, I still live in fear that could all go away within a minute and I could end up on the street. The trauma of not having a place to live for so long never goes away. I get pangs of panic from my past every now and then, and I think that I always will. So I look around me now and I see all these fancy buildings in New Haven going up all over the place, and I wonder, who are they for? They're not for people like me. They're not for working people in New Haven. Maybe they're for people in New York or Fairfield who want a second apartment, or people coming here for a couple of years to make a fortune in the pharmaceutical industry before moving on. I'm worried that our beautiful downtown is becoming a zone catering exclusively to rich people, and that it's making a difference between the have and the have-nots even bigger. It's not for us. Working people are increasingly being pushed out and excluded. So that is why we need inclusionary zoning. I don't think that inclusionary zoning is only affordable housing policy we need, not by a long shot, but I do think it's necessary. Downtown can't become a gated community. The wealthy developers have already made it clear that they're not going to make space for regular folks unless they're literally have no choice. If we can't depend on a safe place to live, how can we build a foundation for our children? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett. Next up, we have Abby and Helen, who I believe will be followed by Jane Nichols and then by Elias Estabrook.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry for my bonnet. It's good seeing you. All right. My name is Helen Martin Dawson, and I live at 31D Liberty Street. I'm here tonight to assert that we need more affordable housing in New Haven, not affordable by the current standards, but truly affordable for our city residents. I have lived in my co-op on Liberty Street for over 50 years. Now I see housing developers come in, built around my neighborhood, but nobody who lives in my neighborhood can even afford to live in it. In those buildings, we have absentee landlords buying up everything and not maintaining the properties. As a result, our residents are moving out, becoming homeless, being evicted. This shouldn't be in this case. If more of the developers that are being built have truly affordable units, residents can stay in their community and our neighborhoods wouldn't be so run down. It would be great if there could be even more deeply affordable units available. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Do we have Abby as well to give testimony at this point, or are we moving on?
Yes, I do have a testimony. Thank you.
Okay. Please give your name and address for the record as well.
Good evening. My name is Abby Feldman, and I live at 17 Stevenson Road. I am here tonight to testify in favor of affordable housing measures in our city. As a New Haven Rising organizer in the Hill, I speak to residents daily about the issues that most affect their lives. And it is clear that housing is one of New Haven residents' primary concerns. Not only the rising cost of rent in New Haven, but the deteriorating conditions in many of our city's houses, apartment buildings, and developments. Too many residents worry that they aren't able to afford what they need for themselves and for their families, and are left with too few options when it comes to finding affordable housing solutions. As we are coming out of the devastating effects of the pandemic and people are getting back to work, it is so important for us to consider as a city how we are making sure that our poorest and most vulnerable New Haveners are not pushed out of our city, and that the needs of our residents are considered first as we welcome new developments. We see countless luxury and high-end apartment buildings being constructed, but the cost of rent and the size of the apartments in too many of them is prohibitive for a majority of our city's individuals and families. I often look at those rents and wonder who can afford to live there. Any measure that can help our city ensure that a definitive portion of new developments is truly affordable will mean that not only do people have more adequate housing options, but that we won't displace our residents with the wealthier transplants and forego the needs of the residents who are already here. Our residents deserve a fair chance to find housing in our city and have a decent quality of life as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next will be Jane Nichols, followed by, I've lost the order slightly here, followed by Elias Estabrook, and then Deborah Powell. Before our next testimony, one additional announcement. If you are in the audience in the attendees list and you're just here to observe and to learn about this policy, but you do not wish to testify, if you have the ability, you can rename yourself in Zoom. Just rename yourself to remove the number in front of your name, which staff has given you if you don't actually wish to testify, and if you have the technical know-how to do that. If not, no problem. We'll learn when we get to your number. But if you do have the technical know-how, you can go ahead and do that. We will now proceed with Jane Nichols.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you and the rest of the Legislation Committee for holding this hearing. My name is Jane Nichols. I live at 28 Tilton Street in New Haven, and I am a graduate student worker at Yale, as well as a leader in Local 33, the Yale Graduate Student Worker Union. I'm speaking now in favor of an inclusionary zoning law for New Haven. I moved here specifically to attend Yale, but this is my home right now, and I've really loved getting to know the city, especially through the Yale Respect New Haven campaign, calling on Yale to pay its fair share. I have moved many times across my adult life, but I was frankly unprepared for the New Haven rental market. I know that there are many stereotypes about who comes to Yale for grad school. We're all rich, we have trust funds, or we move to New Haven on a whim or as a hobby. But that's not the case for a lot of us, and it certainly was not the case for me. When I was notified of my acceptance to Yale's graduate program, I was an essential worker in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, delivery driving for a Jimmy John's in Illinois. My rent there was low enough that even on that paycheck, I could both pay rent and start saving money for the move. I hoped to have enough before long to afford a one-bedroom apartment, or at least a studio apartment, large enough for a couple of bookshelves. The more I learned about the rental market, however, the fainter that hope became. Not only was the average rent, both for studio and one-bedroom apartments, markedly higher than I had expected, the overwhelming majority of places I saw listed required 1.5 or even 2 months' rent as a security deposit, in addition to the upfront payment of the first month. Topping those discoveries off was how early I had to secure housing and put deposits down. While I had been used to rental markets where I could consistently secure an apartment within 1 month of the start of the lease, I had to start looking for housing here a full 4 months in advance of the expected move-in date, finally signing a lease 3 months before I was to move in. Given that arrangements had to be made months earlier than I had expected, I did not have enough saved up to actually be able to afford everything that I had to pay. I ended up leaving my one-bedroom apartment in Illinois for a New Haven apartment with 3 other roommates, no living area, and a bedroom that was too small to fit both bookshelves and drawers at the same time. And even with those compromises, I was unable to pay the first month's rent and security deposit at the same time. One of my roommates-to-be was generous enough to cover my portion of the security deposit until I could save up the money to pay her back.
1 minute, please.
I've seen ads for newer market rate apartment buildings downtown or in East Rock that mention that the units are perfect for grad students, implying that grad students are part of that market. That frankly baffles me. I can't afford to live there, and nobody I know in grad school can. I don't know who the market rate is actually for, but I do know that developers aren't going to set anything aside that most New Haveners can't afford unless the law says they have to. For these reasons, I'm speaking here in favor of an inclusionary zoning policy for New Haven. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for coming on to the Zoom. Next member of the public, who I believe should be Elias Estabrook. Commissioner Estabrook, when you're ready, you can go ahead.
Thank you. I'm looking for the video option. Can you all see me?
We cannot. I'm looking to see if I can do anything on this end. But I don't see an option, so yeah, for the sake of time, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the committee. Again, my name is Elias Esterbrook. I live at 106 New Hall Street, New Haven. I'm a commissioner on the City of New Haven's Affordable Housing Commission, but my testimony tonight is my own and does not represent the views of the commission. I think this ordinance text and map amendment has some good parts. I think we need inclusionary zoning for the areas where market rate housing is already booming, like downtown and Worcester Square. But I think that the details of the strong tier really need some amending in the neighborhoods surrounding downtown and Worcester Square. I grew up in Somerville, Massachusetts before I came to New Haven. It's a historically working class city bordering Boston that went through a major market rate housing boom over the last few decades, just like Boston and Cambridge. Today, many of my former high school classmates and I could not afford to rent there. Average rent for a Somerville apartment was over $2,300 per month in 2015, and it's gone up from there. And I don't want to see New Haven, my current home, go the way of Somerville, with housing prices rising out of reach for most residents. It's discouraging to learn that rent is rising. And LCI staff told our commission in September that average rent in New Haven increased by about 5 to 7% from 2020 to 2021. So that means in September 2021, a one bedroom cost $1,600 on average. A 3-bedroom cost more than $2,000 a month on average. And we know that 51%, so over half of New Haven residents, were cost burdened in 2020, meaning they paid over 30% of their income every month for housing expenses. And I think with the rise in rent since 2020, it's possible that even more households are burdened by housing costs.
1 minute, please.
Sure. So in early 2019, New Haven's Affordable Housing Task Force I'm sorry, my testimony was just interrupted, but can you hear me now?
We can hear and see you now, so
okay.
We can give you a few additional seconds for the technical backup there.
Thanks. So the Affordable Housing Task Force in 2019 suggested that thousands of affordable units are needed to meet the needs of families at lower income levels. I think hundreds of affordable units could be produced downtown through this inclusionary zoning policy that's being proposed. And I think the policy should prioritize construction of mixed income developments in downtown, Worcester Square, Long Wharf, and Westville. I don't think Dixwell, Dwight, The Hill, New Hallville, and Fairhaven are affluent areas of opportunity that the legislation speaks about. And I'm concerned that rising prices, in other words, gentrification, in these lower income neighborhoods surrounding downtown could lead to exclusionary displacement of existing residents, as has been brought up by other people tonight. I think as we discuss the details of this inclusionary zoning policy in the public hearings tonight and in the future, I think it's important we look to other cities with successful models. So for example, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Stamford, Connecticut are small cities that have had inclusionary zoning for over 15 years. Thank you for your time, and I've submitted my written remarks for the record as well.
Thank you, Mr. Estabrook, and that's a good reminder once again for everyone that if you don't get through everything you want to say in your 3 minutes, please do submit written testimony because that will all go into the record and there's not a length limit on that. We have Deborah Powell with us now.
Hello, my name is Deborah Powell. Good evening, my name is Deborah Powell. I live at 31 Lombard Street, New Haven. I am a senior. I've been a homeowner for over 40 years in Fairhaven. The taxes and upkeep for a house and the expense of is expensive, especially when you are retired and on a fixed income. I know some seniors are considering selling their homes and moving into smaller apartments. Unfortunately, the apartments in most cases will cost them more than their current mortgage payments. I think that developers should be investing in affordable apartments for seniors, not just luxury apartments. I have seen the many luxury apartments going up downtown, and developers of these luxury apartments need to build just as many affordable units in the city as well. If they do not build affordable units, then at least they should pay into a fund for affordable housing to be built in the same city. The community would welcome developers more if they would include them rather than exclude them on every project they undertake. I do not think that the city should be giving tax breaks to developers unless they contribute to affordable housing for the community. I am a taxpayer homeowner, and I do not get any tax breaks as those developers do. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I want to recognize, I believe, yes, we have Alder Carmen Rodriguez from the 6th Ward having joined us by phone. Welcome, Alder Rodriguez. And thank you again, Ms. Powell. Next up is Beryl Benson, who will be followed by, I believe Myra Smith, if I have that right. But Ms. Benson, you can give your name and address for the record and go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, my apologies. My name is Beryl Benson. I live at 24 Whittlesey Avenue in New Haven. I'm a born and raised resident of New Haven. I left Connecticut in 2005 and returned in 2011 to raise my son closer to family. I initially rented my first apartment here from a private landlord. The apartment was small, but the property was well maintained and safe. As my son grew, we needed more space. It was then that I began to realize renting from a private landlord homeowner was becoming a thing of the past here in New Haven, and corporate landlords were taking over the city. When I began searching for a new and bigger space, I was working for Yale New Haven Hospital, making decent money. I was able to afford a nice place to live, but my credit score said otherwise. I had no other choice but to accept an apartment from a company that did not require a credit check. I soon realized that meant lowering our quality of life in order to stay in New Haven, where I worked and my son attended school. There were times that I went to work completely exhausted and stressed out from dealing with matters at home that should have been taken care of by my landlord. One example of that was having to spend an entire holiday weekend without a hot water heater because the emergency maintenance crew was unavailable. And that was just the length of time it took for the issue to be acknowledged, not corrected. This meant having to ask friends and family if my son and I could come over to bathe, and finding alternate and ultimately unsafe ways to heat water for bathing and eating, all while working a full-time job and providing for my son as a single mother. While I wanted my focus to be on bettering our lives and my credit score, the reality was that I was spending most of my days, money, and resources on fighting with my corporate landlords to fulfill their responsibilities and duty to provide a safe and healthy environment inside of the homes they own and rent to people like me and so many others. I fully support inclusionary zoning in the city of New Haven because everyone deserves to live in a safe home that provides
1 minute, please.
That provides and supports a good quality of life.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next up, we have Myra Smith, who will be followed by, I believe, Madison Laprice. But Myra Smith, if you're with us, please give your name and address for the record, and you may begin.
Hi, my name is Myra Smith. I live at 64, sorry, I'm trying to get rid of the glare. I live at 64 Stevens Street in New Haven, Connecticut. I am a member of Mothers and Others for Justice, a grassroots advocacy group in New Haven, And I am also the neighborhood services advocate for Christian Community Action. And I work in the food pantry and I run some of the emergency services program. So I see firsthand the need that is needed by the community. And it was the Hill community, but now it's become the entire community and extended and abroad. And one of the main calls that we get in our office is for housing. Now, when COVID first started, the city had to spend so much money housing the homeless, putting them in shelters, creating housing, doing whatever they could to house the homeless. Now, when there is a crisis, you work on a way to implement plans that help with the crisis. So we have a crisis of affordable housing. You don't go and say, okay, we know that you have a crisis with affordable housing, so we're going to create housing. We'll make a couple of units affordable, but the rest will still be out of reach. That's not how you fix a crisis. And I heard someone say, basically, you don't want the city of New Haven to look like they're not good with development, but it's not about the infrastructure and the buildings that make the city of New Haven. It's about the people here. And the people here are struggling. We want to stay here. We want to live here. We want to continue to raise our children here, but it has become impossible to live here. We're already healing and still dealing with all the developers that came in and brought up properties and then became slumlords. They gave us what their definition of affordable housing was, and it's like they punished us for it. We had to live in any and all types of conditions. So now we're trying to get out of that mess, and now it's getting to the point where it becomes competition in the city. So we don't want that. We want to make sure that anybody who does anything in the city that is going to help the homeless or our affordable housing has a knowledge and understanding of what it is, who it is, and who it affects, and what can be done working beside us to figure out what is the best options for us, as opposed to saying, okay, we're going to give you 20% of affordable housing at this and that medium. No, even now having rental assistance is still unaffordable. I just received my Section 8 voucher and still am having problems finding affordable housing. So that should tell you we have a problem when you have someone willing to help you pay your rent and you still can't find affordable housing. So I see it as this. You ever go to a cookout and they've got ribs and all the good fancy food on the grill, but then they say the kids can only have the hot dogs? That's how I feel they treat people when it comes to housing. Like, you can have this and you can have a minimum of this.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Smith. And once again, please submit any additional testimony you had to the public record, public testimony at newhavenct.gov. And thank you again. Madison Laprise is up next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Madison Laprise, and I'm currently a Yale student. I live at 345 Temple Street in Timothy Dwight College. I've lived in Connecticut my entire life. I was born and raised in Bristol. I'm part of a group on campus called YHAP, which is the Yale Homelessness and Hunger Action Project. I've worked directly with the grassroots organization Mothers and Others for Justice, and our work is informed by people who have experienced homelessness or been closely affected by it. And I want to speak about the need for affordable housing and why the proposed inclusionary zoning laws aren't necessarily reflective of what's affordable. A living situation is deemed as affordable if the cost of housing and utilities combined does not exceed 30% of the area median income, or AMI. AMI is calculated on the level of New Haven County, and so that AMI is 70,000. This number, which we use to determine what is and isn't affordable, isn't reflective of what is truly affordable for the city itself, since the AMI of New Haven has a much lower figure at around $42,000. It's imperative that inclusionary zoning in our city be truly inclusionary to the New Haven resident. As it stands now, inclusionary zoning posits that all newly constructed units with 10 or more buildings set aside 5 to 10% of units that are affordable to the county's AMI. However, we already know that the county AMI is not reflective of New Haven's needs. I request that there be more housing opportunities in New Haven that meet and not greatly exceed these guidelines. We cannot continue to use the county's metric of affordability, where New Haven is a clear outlier in terms of wealth and opportunity. New Haven needs housing that is genuinely affordable more than it needs housing that is affordable to the county overall. So thank you for your time, and my comment is available in written testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I can confirm that we've received that written testimony as well. So thank you. Charmaine Yun.
Good evening, Legislation Committee of the Board of Elders and those involved in the New Haven Inclusionary Zoning Study. My name is Charmaine Yoon. I live at 267 Dwight Street. I'm a member of Mothers and Others for Justice, a grassroots advocacy group of Christian Community Action. And I just stepped off my role as the Coordinated Access Network Landlord Engagement Specialist. And part of my job was helping clients experiencing homelessness find affordable apartments. That was my job. And the amount of apartments that were just out of our reach was staggering. Every day I would be searching, I would be scrolling and scrolling, and once in a while I would find something that may be decently affordable. But then when we find that, landlords tell me there are 50 people who had already called them that day. And then even after that, there are many hoops that our clients just couldn't jump through in the application process. An affordable 2-bedroom, which again isn't common, is about $1,200 or $1,300. And people are expected, I know you guys probably all know this, but people are expected to have 3 times the rent, which would mean that applicants would have to be making about $3,900. I hope this is the right way, but $3,900 a month. I did a rough average monthly income of my 26 families who needed a 2-bedroom, and it came out to $1,849. The stuckness that many people feel, it's rampant. We talk about equity and inclusion, and it's as if affordable housing is the answer. And in my opinion, affordable housing barely scratches the surface. I'd much rather talk about homeownership, but I know that's for another day. I just think about, even if our clients get rental assistance, the money isn't there for them to build wealth for themselves or their family. It's just simply their conduits from the government to the hands of the investors. And we're not really righting the wrongs of past discrimination and really working towards equity and inclusion. So let's at least get affordable housing right. 5% is not enough. Not even 10%, it's just not enough. And I deeply appreciate the work of the IZ study. And we ask that you amend the term affordable housing to be truly affordable and inclusionary to be for all New Haven residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yoon. Next up, who do we have? I've lost my place here. Well, I'm sure staff can tell us. Kelsey Steele. Yes, Pastor Steele.
Good evening, distinguished members of the board, and I am Reverend Kelsey Steele. My address is 235 Bellevue, and I'm here in dual capacity tonight. One as Pastor Barrett Memorial AME Zion Church, Dixwell, and also the Neighborhood and Faith-Based Partnership Lead for the Fairfield Center for Housing Opportunity, where we advocate for affordable housing, unite CT, and homeless service providers. And I'm here to testify in support of inclusionary zoning policy that creates more affordable housing, ensuring responsible development that benefits the community they profit from, and prevent residents from being displaced. Because we need more opportunities, better jobs, and more affordable housing in every neighborhood, but especially formerly redline areas like Dixwell, where my church sits in the heart. And our city is reaching a breaking point, a deadly pandemic on top of decades of austerity will only exacerbate patterns of segregation and racial inequalities if we don't do something now. Developers, city leaders, and leaders of wealthy institutions have an obligation to partner with our communities to finally end decades of segregated development and ensure a just recovery. This unique crisis, unprecedented in our lifetime, should remind all of us that we are all in this together and our fate are fundamentally linked. A spiritual trial is upon us, and now is the time for all of us to do our part. there never was a time that we could tolerate such injustice, but the COVID-19 crisis has clarified the stakes. The same neighborhoods that have been cut out of opportunities for the last 80 years are the neighborhoods that experienced the most foreclosures in the 2008 financial crisis and the highest rate of COVID-19 infections during the pandemic.
1 minute, sir.
I want people to understand my community was in crisis well before COVID-19. There is about a 11-year difference in life expectancy between Newhallville and Westville. That should tell the story. I'm in total support of inclusionary zoning. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Pastor. Next up, we have Karen Du Bois Walton, who will be followed by Melissa Lytrell and then Kate Maloney.
Good evening, Alders. It is a pleasure to be with you this evening as you debate this important piece of legislation, the inclusionary zoning. I am Karen Du Bois Walton. I serve as the president of Elm City Communities, the public housing authority for the city of New Haven, reside at 58 East Pearl Street. And I have submitted and hope that you have for review my 4-page testimony, which I will certainly not read through, but hope that you will take the time to review the issues that I've raised in that.
And I can confirm that this committee has received that, and me confirming that does not cut into your 3 minutes. So
Thank you. All right, thank you so much. This affordable housing is obviously what I have devoted the past 15 years of my life to trying to promote here. And I would like to differ with a statement that was made earlier that stated that the last thing we want to do is slow down development. My time over the past 15 years has been time spent trying to undo the damage caused by failed housing policy at the federal, state, and local level, and trying to create instead some opportunities for families. We know that housing is one of the main ways in which people create wealth in communities. And we know that the discriminatory ways in which housing policy has been used in the past have been the main ways in which wealth has been kept, particularly from the Black and brown communities. And so this is a moment when you have an opportunity to take action on housing policy. And I would say that rather than think about it as the last thing we want to do is slow development, I think the last thing we want to do is contribute to ongoing segregation. The last thing we want to do is make decisions in today's housing policy that we're going to regret down the road, and that people who will sit in our seat 10, 15, 20 years from now will say, what were they doing? Because they continue to do something that's going to segregate our community by income and by race. And so the suggestions that I've included in here are ways in which I think you can strengthen what's in front of you if you do continue down a road of an inclusionary zoning policy, which has its own flaws. I appreciate that somebody raised the issue of housing affordability is not just rent, but it's utilities. I would call your attention that this fails to include that, and the utility cost can significantly increase rental costs, making it unaffordable. So I include in here a proposal for you to think about with respect to that. This, for the small amount of units that will be given, that will be earned, does offer a pretty rich benefit to developers, and I highlight that in a number of ways here. But I do remind you that where you've used public land in the past, you've often gotten 30% affordability. And I would encourage you to push for that on the public land section as well in this proposal. And finally, I'd like to really call your attention to the fact that the greatest need has been outlined as for 0 to 30% of area median income. And I know we keep talking about 50%, but the greatest need in this community has been for families making 0 to 30% of area median income. And so I call your attention to some suggestions about how to make sure that the voucher units could actually be used for families at that lowest income. There's certainly plenty more in my testimony. I'll leave that for you to read, and I appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you. And again, we do have your testimony. It has been sent to this committee. So thank you again for your testimony. Next, Melissa Lytrell.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa. My address is 416 Edgewood Avenue in New Haven. I'm a longtime resident of New Haven as well as the Newhartville section. And I disagree with the IZ zoning regulations that you're looking to implement on many levels because the community has not properly been informed of the zoning. And I don't think that there's proper transparency and honesty in regards to the zoning and actually what's being offered to the people that you're actually displacing, as well as the gentrification that's actually being done as well. I feel as though if you're going to make these changes, try to do these changes in a proper and honesty way as far as letting the public know, listening to the public, taking the information from the community, speaking to the community, working with the community, and making a change together, not making a change on behalf of the community. So if you want to do something different, then do something different and learn how to incorporate the community and the people that are living in the community that are being affected. There's not enough affordable housing. There's not enough affordable home ownership, and the changes that's going to be made in the zoning will affect them and it'll affect the people that are renting in the community as a whole. So I definitely do not agree with the zoning, and that's really all I had to say. A lot of my testimony was also written as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony and for joining us this evening. We have Kate Maloney next, who should be followed by Lily Chambers and then Sinclair Williams. But Kate Maloney, if you're ready, please state your name and address for the record, and then you can proceed.
Hi, y'all. I can't get my video to start, so I apologize in advance about that. So my name is Caitlin. Can you hear me okay? Hold on. Oh, here we go. Meeting alert. Start video.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Let's see here. Oh, sorry. All right. I so much prefer in person.
There you are.
There we are. So my name is Caitlin Maloney. Thanks for letting me speak tonight. I'm a community organizer with New Haven Legal Aid. My address is 98 Fairview Ave in West Haven. But before you kind of roll your eyes that I live in West Haven and not New Haven, I work here, I play here, my kids go to school here, and I've built many relationships with residents in the city over the years, just, organizing in the city around issues of affordable housing, around issues of, people being worried about gentrification, displacement. And I'm also a member of the People's Collaborative for Dixwell, which is a group of residents informing and affecting change in the development, revitalization, and planning of Dixwell and surrounding neighborhoods, keeping Dixwell's legacy alive and building a more just and equitable future. So, housing insecurity is a really important issue to me personally. I grew up as a foster kid, moved around a ton as a kid. I know what it's like to be a part of working class struggle. I know what it's like to be displaced. And as I said, for the past few years, I've been working on these issues. I remember when the task force was working on looking at tools that would help with the affordable housing crisis in New Haven. And I know that inclusionary zoning was one of them. On the surface, I do understand that inclusionary zoning, would appear to be a useful tool. And I do applaud the city for looking into, tools to help with this. But however, I think city development staff have really missed the opportunity to provide meaningful resident feedback. Instead, they have relied mostly on this outside consulting firm. We've had a couple meetings with Aisha and other people, but we haven't, our worries and concerns have not been fully heard or addressed. So what PCD and other residents that I've spoken with across the city are calling for is a policy that does not lead to further unaffordability, gentrification, and displacement of New Haven's working class communities. I keep hearing tonight that folks are bringing up the 20% number of affordability when really that is only public land. All private transactions and developments being built on private lands will be 5% in every single neighborhood, pretty much besides the downtown area, which will be 15%.
1 minute,
5%.
please.
5% is not enough. It just isn't. And also these are in these neighborhoods where you're saying 5%, these are one of the only last affordable neighborhoods that do exist in New Haven. So why would we have a low number when we're looking at affordability rates? People want to stay in their neighborhoods, just like Alder Jeanette Morrison said. People want to be here. People are concerned about that. The AMI does not reflect New Haven's AMI. People are making way less than $46,000 a year. Family of four, like not everyone makes that. So I believe at the end of the day, this policy just isn't strong enough. I think we need to put it back on the table. I think we need to look at a higher percentage And, you know, it may make sense in downtown neighborhoods, like some Yale students have mentioned today, the 15% could make sense there. There are tons of luxury developments being built there, but you're providing incentives to developers. So, you know, like tax breaks and things like that. So you're really inviting this investment and this development that, you know, Deputy Stephen Fontana mentioned in the beginning. Like, I know y'all want development, I get that, but also let's think of the people in the neighborhoods now. People are worried about being displaced. So please, I would love you to take another look at this, and I'm glad you're going to have another public hearing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Maloney. And we, I believe, have received written testimony from you as well. And we,
Thank you, I appreciate it.
This committee has, you know, recognizes you as an organizer in the community, and so we won't hold West Haven against you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I see the eye roll sometimes. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
You too, thank you. Lily Chambers, I believe, is next.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can. Are you able to turn on your video as well or not?
No, hold on.
If you are, then great. And if not, then you can proceed.
Okay.
Oh, there you are. Great.
Oh,
give us your address for the record, and then, yeah, you can get started.
My name is Lily Chambers. I live at 339 West Division Street. I've actually submitted my written testimony, but I just wanted to touch base with a few things. The inclusionary zoning alleges that it'll address affordability housing crisis. But in reviewing the study, we found that it's more exclusionary than inclusionary. The developers set aside only 5% for affordable housing, which actually is 95% unaffordable. The proposal separates the city into 3 different tiers. You have tier 1, which is, of course, the core downtown. You have tier 2, which is the strong, which is Dixwell, Dwight, East Rock, Mill River, and Longwood. Then you have tier 3, which is the rest of New Haven. And both tiers are at 5%, which that's ridiculous. And there's no way that that's enough affordable housing for the residents of New Haven. And besides, why would you separate it in tiers? It's one New Haven, so there should be no 3 tiers. The proposal also offers the developers a way to opt out of building affordable units with the in lieu fee per affordable unit, which is actually an opt-out option. It already has a 5% unaffordable unit. Now you're going to make that entire building practically a market rate unit, which is another way of redlining. But the reality is, with this in lieu fee, it comes up to $168,000 to $225,000 per unit as an opt-out fee, with even lower premium payments. But the issue I have is in the proposal that I looked at, it didn't say anything about where these funds are going to go if they're received. But I have a suggestion that you use
1 minute, please,
to make 100% affordable housing in the New Haven area. Now, this also plans for luxury apartments, 1 and 2 bedroom units. In the city of New Haven, we have families. Not everyone is a married couple, 1 or 2 children. We have different household makeups in the city of New Haven. And let's face it, the $46,000 a year and $58,000 a year household in New Haven make way less than that. And we should be going according to the income level for residents of New Haven and not that of a Guilford or suburbia, because we need to go by those who live here in the New Haven area. Now, the also proposal premium developers talks about building up, meaning making the units taller. And that's not fair either. Therefore, you're waiving the parking minimum, which isn't fair. So that needs to be addressed. The reality is,
Mr. Chair,
the order holders have the right to amend this inclusionary zoning study. You can amend it, you can stop it, you can change it. You have the power to do this and put together a committee with alders, committee members, and residents of New Haven so we can all come together and work on affordable units for the New Haven residents, because those of us who live here.
Please bring your remarks to a conclusion. Thank you.
No problem. But we want to be able to stay here. But you have the power. So at the end of the day, we want New Haven built up, but not at the expense of the residents of New Haven. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, and we have received your written testimony as well. St. Clair Williams.
Can y'all hear me? Hello?
We can hear you. Yep.
Oh,
Give your
look at that.
name and address for the record, and then you can go ahead.
My name is Sinclair Williams, and I live at 95 Division Street in New Hallville. All right. I live in New Hallville, where the median income is less than $40,000, and I'm a legal aid lawyer. So I want to ask, how many of y'all have ever had someone call you crying, asking you, begging you to do something, anything, to stop the police from coming to their door and forcibly putting them and their children and everything they own out onto the street? Because that's what I do in my job. I spend every day talking with people, often single moms, working essential jobs, who still can't afford their rent because rent is so expensive in New Haven. And that's why I'm begging you to make this policy more affordable for working poor families in New Haven. That means, as many people have said, making it more than 5% in tier 2 neighborhoods like mine. It means making the definition of affordability be based on New Haven, it's the city as opposed to New Haven County. And it also means having an actual definition for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which no one has brought up yet. But if you read the policy right now, there's no actual definition for that, of how those funds will be used, what restrictions will be placed on those funds. So all those questions need to be answered before this policy is actually passed and voted on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We next have Anstrus Farwell, who will be followed by, let's see, Marjorie Shansky is next on my list after Ms. Farwell. But Ms. Farwell, I think you're just on the phone, so I guess we won't get you on video, but please give your name and address for the record, and then you may go ahead.
This is Anstrus Farwell at 37 Worcester Place. I have been working on affordable housing issues for many years and have been a strong proponent of creating a community land trust project for New Haven to help create more stable, affordable housing. I don't think that the legislation that you have before you, the proposal, is really ready yet. Inclusionary zoning is an important tool to have in the city just as much as ADUs. I think it will always be a small part of what helps create affordable housing. And even though it'll probably only be a small part of that, it still needs to be carefully crafted. And at this point, I agree with what you've heard from many speakers, that it needs to be based on the city's AMI. I think the map needs to be rethought. I think offering what's being called, I think erroneously, a density bonus in order to have a developer include affordable units means that you'd be crowding people and families into even tinier units, not really providing quality. So I think I feel divided. In one way, we see so many developments going up with no affordable units, and we need to get in front of that. And time is of the essence. But I don't think that the proposal that's before you tonight is ready to fly. And I think you've heard some good suggestions about working closer with residents that have been at the heart of this debate for many years and have lived experience. So I'd really suggest pausing or tabling this and trying to find a way to really encourage
1 minute, please.
A deeper and well-structured way of talking with people in our community, not just consultants, about how to craft an inclusionary zoning ordinance. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for your testimony. And I will remind the public once more that we are not planning on taking action on this item tonight. The reason for that being this is a public hearing and we want both public input. So thank you again for your testimony. I'm informed by staff that that's the end of the list of people who signed up in advance. So I'm not sure who's left on the attendees list wishes to testify, but if there's any member of the public here who wishes to be heard on this item, please indicate so either by raising your hand on Zoom or by, I think you can type something into the Q&A function, but please indicate in one way or another, if you're able, that you wish to testify and be heard on this item. And I'll give folks a minute or two to figure out their Zoom options. I'll ask a second time. Is there any member of the public who has not yet been heard on this item who wishes to be heard on this item this evening? I see a hand has gone up. Mr. Darren Sade, who is now with us in the room. So please go ahead and give us your name and your address for the record, and you can proceed.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Darren Side. Offices are in New York City, 260 West 91st Street. And thank you all for your continued service of the community and everyone for their input. The Board of Alders, Economic Development Consultant, Aisha Woods, everybody. I'm very hesitant to get my hand up tonight. It's a tough topic, and I am in support of the topic. I am in support of inclusionary zoning. I am not in support of the way it's currently designed. And I probably have a bunch of things that are very unpopular to say, but the fact is I want it to work. And in case anyone doesn't know, I am a developer and I have a couple projects in New Haven, and I've been I've been grateful to be a party to some of this ongoing dialogue, public and in kind of behind the scenes a little bit. And I've been involved in other cities with other types of inclusionary zoning ordinances. And I know stories of policies coming out that just destroy investment in beautiful blossoming cities. And everything that's going on in New Haven right now is just absolutely incredible. But there's no shame in saying that the affordable units that we are all discussing, they do not get built if the investment stops coming into town. They will not get built if people do not invest in the city and build free market units as well. The only way to pay for the affordable units is for developers and investors to make a profit on the buildings that they build. It's just how it is. So the policy has to come out in a manner that continues to make investors money. And as thank you, as cold and straightforward as that sounds, believe me, if we had a lot of time, I could tell you about my background and about my family's background and all that. I'm a big believer in affordable housing. My parents come from nothing, from less than nothing in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm a big believer in it, but it has to be done in a manner that continues to bring the flow of investment dollars into the communities, and therefore leads to job creation, leads to inclusion opportunity for families, individuals, leads to permanent jobs, temporary jobs. The dry cleaner gets to up their business because more people are coming to town, the bakery, the pizza place, yada, yada, the tax revenue, the permit fees, all of it comes off of development. We don't want to stop the development. I wish there was an easy solution to this thing. I have a prepared email that I will send through that I did not send through yet. And maybe you guys can consider it, some ideas in there, but I don't know, it's tough. There's not a perfect answer to this thing. Thank you all though for the time and the effort. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Is there any other member of the public who wishes to be heard on this item tonight? As I'm about to make my final call for public testimony this evening, I will give one last reminder that any member of the public can submit public testimony in writing to publictestimony@newhavenct.gov. You have my assurances that the chair of this committee will read every word of each of them, and that they're a matter of public record. So they will be accessible to all who want to read them. So one last call for this evening. Any member of the public who wishes to be heard on this item this evening? Seeing none, I know I at least have a couple of questions that I would like city staff to speak on this evening, and I want to give colleagues on this committee another shot if you have questions for this evening. But again, at the end of this evening, it is my intention to hold this item open, and so we will not be deliberating or taking action, or at least it is my preference that we don't do that. So I will ask now if any members of this committee have additional questions for city staff. I'm being patient and giving the committee a chance to go first, but I do have a couple of questions, and I will go ahead with them. So one big question I had in reading this proposal, and thank you to the entire team for being both thorough and I think as concise as possible, given the huge amount of detail here. One big question that did stand out to me was about this affordable housing trust fund. I know that many cities that have taken on inclusionary zoning do have this payment in lieu of housing option. And I know that different cities have done different things with it. So I did want to ask if you all have more detail about what the use of that fund would be.
I see Arlevia is here, so I'll pass it to her. I just wanted to say that is, that was an item that was also sort of outlined as a need by the Affordable Housing Task Force. I think it's probably been discussed a little bit at the Affordable Housing Commission, and it's definitely would be dedicated towards the production of affordable housing. But I'll turn it over to Arlevia for any more detail.
Good evening, Arlevia Samuel, Acting Executive Director, LCI. The purpose of that would be, as Aisha stated, any money that is deemed for the Affordable Housing Fund would go towards the building, development, or rehabilitation of affordable units throughout the city. With I know they would go to nonprofits who do building for low income. It will go towards any developers who are not a part of this doing smaller projects that want to do a higher level of affordability but have a gap in their financing. So it will be designated totally for affordable housing development.
Thank you for that. This maybe is about my own ignorance, but is there legislative language that designates the fund for that purpose at this time, or how does that work mechanically?
I don't think there is yet, but I could be wrong.
Okay, something else for this committee to consider as we go forward. So thank you for that. A second question that I had was, do we have a sense or a proposal for by what process will affordable units built through this policy would be built through this policy should it be enacted, or a version of it. How will these units be allocated? We've heard from the public, and of course we all know from our own lived experience that the list of individuals and families who need affordable units greatly exceeds the supply, and will continue to greatly exceed the supply, in I think any version of this proposal. Do we have a process that we're thinking of for how these units get allocated? Is it first come, first serve? Is there a lottery? How would that work?
Olivia, do you want to address that? And then maybe Steve can also provide some more details on the way the handbook is currently drafted, and but I'll turn it over to Olivia for.
That has not been definitively decided yet. We had discussions regarding housing navigators, whom would the developers would choose specific independent contractors or consultants who would assist them with reaching out to the right clientele who actually will qualify for the low affordable units to make sure that they're meeting their minimum requirements. And they would actually select the units, do their background checks or whatever to select the tenants and make sure the rents are at an affordable level. And at the time, it's not determined if it will be LCI or independent, who would ascertain yearly to certify that they are actually in compliance with having the correct income level tenants and the correct rent levels throughout the entire year. As far as basically that where enforcement will come in if they're not with non-compliance.
Thank you for that as well. Mr. Riley, go ahead. And if you could give your name and address for the record before you begin. Thank you.
Yes, Stephen Riley. I'm with HRNA Advisors. Our office is in Washington, D.C., 925 15th Street, Northwest. Just wanted to build on what Olivia mentioned as it relates to sort of screening administration of the units. Aisha mentioned as well, we've been working on developing a manual that would sit alongside the policy and sort of provide additional detail in terms of how the program would be run and operated, sort of on a day-to-day basis. And as Olivia mentioned, the idea is that it would be overseen at the property level. So you'd have the owner and property manager overseeing the sort of screening and selection of tenants to be in those units in the same way that you would for a market rate unit in that property. And the units would be provided on a first come, first served basis to applicants to those units. The one exception to that would be for voucher holders. The screening and selection for those would be by an approved operator, separate from the property owner, given the sort of specific requirements and policy structure in place for those units.
I appreciate the explanation. I see Director Woods, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, we're also, the manual, we're also developing, screening criteria that would not, I know we heard from many in much of the testimony, the struggles having to do with credit checks and things like that create additional barriers for affordable housing. So we're looking to set some standards for screening levels as well that would not exclude, people who are most in need of these units.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification there as well. I think that is another thing that this committee is going to have to seriously consider, because, it's really important for us to understand how this policy would work in practice, not just sort of how it is on paper. I have two other questions that I think are pretty brief. I see Alder Marchand's hand. Alder Marchand, is your question a direct follow-up to something that we're discussing right now? Not really. Okay, I'm going to ask these two questions briefly, and then Adam Marchand will be next. So my third question is, we heard from several people in the public about some discomfort with using the county AMI rather than a city-based metric. And I understand that that's a metric that comes to us from HUD. But I did just want to hear from you all, like, is it feasible to use a different metric? Is it advisable? What is your take on that?
I'm happy to speak to this, Aisha, if you'd like. Yeah, so in the development, we work on inclusionary zoning policies across the country, and this question comes up a lot in terms of recognizing differences at the regional and jurisdiction level in income. And we always advise in using the regional AMI number because that aligns with the HUD number. It's what people are used to seeing in terms of administrating affordable units. And so it provides much less friction in terms of how those units are run and operated, and a real more streamlined sort of from the administrative side. I think the core of the issue gets at serving households of lower incomes. And so what we always recommend is, rather than setting up a different basis around which you're using your AMI at a city level versus a regional level, instead focusing on lowering the AMI of the regional level that you're serving, and you're really sort of accomplishing the same goal, but doing so by lowering the AMI versus setting a new sort of system of metrics. And so that's what we really look to do, and part of the presentation that Aisha went over is really trying to push that AMI level much lower than what you typically see in inclusionary zoning policies at 50% AMI, recognizing that 50% AMI at the region is different than 50% AMI at the city of New Haven, but trying to set a policy that is at that deeper level of affordability, but within the sort of framework that people are familiar with in terms of running and operating affordable units. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. No, and I understand the arithmetic there as well. I was just wondering what the thought was about other measures. So then my final question for this evening, unless somebody says something very shocking, is do you see the goal of this policy as primarily, well, obviously it's primarily about trying to increase the stock of affordable housing, but is the goal to do that by spurring additional new development than we would have in the absence of this policy? Or is it about transforming new development that was going to happen anyway? Because I think that there's actually a big philosophical difference between those two things. And so I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
I think I'll take that, Alder.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say of the two choices that you've given me, I would say the latter. We have what I consider to be a fairly robust and somewhat sustainable currently interest in investment and development in New Haven. And the goal is to do as you suggested, I believe, in your latter phrase or clause, which is to ensure that there's at least a portion of that going to affordable units and as deeply affordable as possible. Those are the goals that we set out. So our intent is not to deter or discourage development, but to ensure that the development that we believe is going on currently and would be interested in continuing to go on in the city will incorporate and include those affordable units at those deeply affordable levels.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that window into your thinking. I will yield, and I will recognize Alder Marchand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thank City Plan Director Woods and the entire staff team for their presentation earlier. And I certainly thank the members of the public who have testified. Clearly, people have stronger feelings about this issue, and understandably so. Quality affordable housing is one of our key issues in our legislative agenda. There's a significant need in this area. My question is really in response to a criticism I read from someone who sent written testimony, Attorney Ben Tracton, who has very strong opinions on this. But one of his criticisms is that the ordinance will set up administrative burdens for developers that they are not equipped or interested in carrying, and that it's going to lead to a morass of difficulty and more work for city staff and city departments that are not properly resourced for these new, for the oversight of these new requirements, paperwork and such. And so I wanted to ask the staff what they think about the kind of additional administrative work that this program creates, both on the city staff side, but also on the side of developers who will have to, you know, look at potential residents and their income statements in order to determine eligibility, et cetera. So if you could say a little bit more about the administrative side of it and what you anticipate the needs might be from the city side going forward. I asked this as a member of this committee and also vice chair of finance. So that's my question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll speak to sort of the development application process and the zoning process, and then I'll turn it over to Arlevia for the implementation piece of it, or for the sort of ongoing enforcement. It would add, you know, it would add another piece of information or thing that we're considering at site plan review, you know, that would also go before the City Plan Commission as part of the development application. I think it's, there will be some work that we'll have to lean on with our, you know, Office of Management and Budget in terms of doing the math on the tax and writing up the tax agreements. So there are some additional administrative pieces associated with. From the city plan zoning side, I don't see it as a larger burden. There will be some additional zoning analysis, obviously, to you know, because there are some zoning incentives there, so those will have to be clarified by the developer. I think really on the developer side, it will, you know, really be agreeing to, you know, having like an inclusive screening process, which might look different than what they're used to. So they're going to have to make some adjustments in the way they look at tenants, I think. But also, I don't see it as a lot of additional documentation or administrative burden on their part. And I'll turn it over to Arlevia in terms of how her department might be. Although she may have stepped aside for a second. Stephen Riley can also talk a little bit about the checklist points and what the deliverables from the developer would be.
Yeah, happy to. The idea is at the property level, for any non-voucher unit, you're essentially running the tenant application and screening process in the same way that you always would as a property owner or manager. It would look no different aside from just ensuring that you are income qualifying the people in those IZ units. And then in terms of any other additional sort of administrative requirements, it would really just be then submitting documentation of that to the city. So when a new IZ unit is filled, kind of sharing that information with the city, and then once annually being able to show recertification of IZ tenants and sharing that with the city as well. So the idea is that we are hopefully not creating many layers of additional burden, but are structuring it such that you're able to operate the building much the way that you would normally.
Thank you, Mr. Riley, and thank you, Director Woods. I see that Ms. Samuel's back if she would like to weigh in on the question of the administrative workloads that this new ordinance would create if it were passed.
Someone would have to be in charge of the administration and enforcement, where they would submit their certifications for the screening, certifications for tenant income, certification for the rent amounts. If they fail to comply, if they're found in non-compliance, then they would be, depending upon at what point in the development they're at, or if they're in operating, they could either be refused any permits or special exceptions or things they may need for the development, or if it's after the fact and it's during operating and it's a developer, the owner who's in non-compliance, we would impose fines or fees until they come into compliance. Or if it's on a tenant's behalf, then they could be evicted from the unit.
Great. Thank you for these responses to my question. And I think it's just another layer of consideration that we will need to give to this ordinance amendment and then beyond, should we choose to pass it as we look forward to another budget cycle starting early in the new year. So I would encourage the city staff to be thinking concretely about those things and having conversations with management in the budget as well about it. Mr. Chair, that's all I have for now. There's a lot to chew on here. I fully anticipate having more questions when we reconvene next time, but for now, that's what I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alder Marchand. I recognize Alder Ferraro Santana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Many of you on the call on the board have not been around as long as I have. And this has been danced around before in different ways. I recall similar conversations over 10 years ago, 13 years ago, 15 years ago, and things went way by the wayside. Compliance wasn't in conformity. People were not doing what they were supposed to do. And so when it came to giving tax breaks and incentives to big developers, it was found that the compliance particulars were never caught up to date. And so what do you do then? Do you go back to the developer and say, we're not going to give you any more properties to build because you've never been in compliance? That isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen. And so you're building these layers of AMI compatibility, and you're saying that these are things that you're going to tell a big developer who's bringing in lots of apartments. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to work. And that's my honest opinion, because I've seen it happen before. And the city did a horrible job in the past of reviewing compliance documents to ensuring that that the AMIs were reached. And what happened is that rather than give them to affordable units, they were giving them to their friends or colleagues or other people, and then bringing in paperwork stating that they had 10 units of affordable housing, and we were still giving them tax rebates and incentives. So that's all I have to say on this issue, and it needs to be looked at further. You guys have not been around as long as I have, and I've seen it, and it was a disaster. If you talk to people who have been on the board as long as I have, and that have been around as long as I have, understand it. And we went through many issues in the past, and it was taken, it was found not feasible. So that's all I have to say.
As a point of order, I will remind colleagues that we are not currently in deliberations on this item. We're still in the public hearing. Although, of course, this committee recognizes your long-standing expertise, Alder.
I just wanted to make that clear to you, that it is very difficult to keep developers in line. and to ensure that someone from the city is tracking their percentages of units that they're giving. That's all I'm trying to say. And I appreciate the fact that you had me listen, and I know it's not a deliberation, but it's what I feel. And so if we're going to do this, then someone needs to be in charge, and they have to be responsible for this task and held accountable. You just can't leave it to a department saying, oh, well, we'll just give it to so-and-so and, you know, that's her responsibility, but there's no checks and balances. And this is what happened before. So someone needs to do checks and balances. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you for your perspective. Do any members of other members of the committee have any questions for city staff at this time? Keeping in mind that we'll have another go at this. Seeing none. Alder Marchand, I see you coming off mute.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm prepared to make a motion if you think now is a good time to do it.
I will make one last call to colleagues. Any questions for city staff? And if not, then I believe a motion would be appropriate.
Mr. Chair, I move that we continue the public hearing on this item at the next meeting of the Legislation Committee.
Second.
There's been a motion to continue the public hearing on this item at the next Legislation Committee meeting. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I will call the roll to vote just as soon as I get the committee list order up on my screen here. Alder Furlow.
Yes.
Alder Ferraro Santana.
Yes.
Alder Douglas. I'll come back to Alder Douglas. Alder Morrison.
Yes.
Alder Marchand.
Yes.
One more call, Alder Douglas.
Yes, you had me muted. I couldn't say anything. Yes.
Well, you're unmuted now, sir. And I'm vote yes as well. So we will continue the public portion, the public hearing on this item when this committee next convenes. And that time will be duly noticed, and folks will have plenty of heads up.
Mr. Chair.
Alder Marchand.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
There's been a motion to adjourn, which has been seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the roll. Alder Furlow.
Yes.
Alder Ferraro Santana.
Yes.
Alder Douglas.
Yes.
Alder Morrison.
Yes.
Alder Marchand.
Yes.
I vote yes as well. We are adjourned. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.